Thank you everybody for coming to the webinar today. We're really excited about the information that Mr. Hess has to share with all of you, and we're excited about this mobile learning webinar series and the resource that it's been to many of you. And for those of you attending one of our webinars for the first time, we hope that you enjoy the information. Real quick, I'm going to be tweeting throughout this. Feel free to join us. Our hashtag is Rapid Intake, and that's also our username is @RapidIntake, so feel free to join us there. Real quick, I wanted to talk about our sponsors and kind of thank them for putting on this mobile learning webinar series. Rapid Intake, our first sponsor, I would just really quickly wanted to mention the new Rapid Intake M-Learning Studio. This webinar today is a general interest webinar, and it's going to be useful for anybody regardless of the tool that they use or what they have implemented right now. Rapid Intake does have its own tool that they use, even though it will not be the focus of this webinar. But there is going to be another webinar this Friday on that tool for anybody who would like to learn more about it. You can visit rapidintake.com/mobile-webinar, and you can sign up for that demonstration, or you can go and just start a 30-day free trial at rapidintake.com. Our second sponsor is M-Learning DevCon 2011, coming up here in October. And M-Learning DevCon is a special conference focused on actual development and being able to actually create something. So many conferences nowadays focus on theory and case studies, but mobile M-Learning DevCon focuses on each session having something specific that you can take away and you can implement immediately. We want to provide training on tools, technologies, the best way to build your media files, etc., and the best way to do those things so that you can launch your mobile program and get things going. There is a registration deadline coming up the 29th, so register by then for $649. It's a very, very affordable and useful conference. You can learn more at mlearningdevcon.com. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the webinar here in a moment. Just to let everybody know, we are recording this webinar, and it will be made available on our website, on rapidintake.com. And we would like to thank Garin Hess for presenting today. And with that, I will turn the time over to Garin.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that preamble to this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and give me just a moment to do that. And Chris, can you just confirm that you can see that okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have had experiences where I've done a webinar and gone right along thinking that everyone could see what I was sharing and not happening there, so I appreciate that. So again, I appreciate everybody participating today. We've got had over 500 registrations for this webinar, so mobile learning is a very hot topic right now in the learning technology industry. And to give you just a little bit of additional background to myself, I used to work as a training manager for a software company back in the 90s, and that's where I was introduced to technology-based training and created my first e-learning solution, e-learning course in Toolbook. So some of you may be familiar with Toolbook. It's still kicking around, but I fell in love immediately with e-learning, as I've always been interested in teaching and technology, and so it's been a great fit for the things that I love, and it's been a real exciting experience to be involved in the industry over the last 10 or so years. So I started Rapid Intake back in 2000, was one of the founders, and we created custom courses for Fortune 500 companies such as HP, Walmart, and Bank of America, and others. And as part of that process, we learned a lot about how to effectively create e-learning. And you're probably wondering, why is he talking so much about e-learning if we're going to get into mobile learning? Well, it's kind of interesting because when we started creating e-learning as it became very well adopted in the first part of the last decade and became more mainstream, a lot of the same kinds of problems had to be solved that we're now having to solve again for mobile learning. So we did a lot of custom course development, and in 2006 and 2007 our company really transitioned into a tools-based company where we started creating rapid development tools for e-learning. And then recently this year we launched a rapid development tool for mobile learning, which Chris mentioned. And my focus is not going to be really on trying to promote that tool, although certainly I hope that there is some interest in taking a closer look at it. But I am going to use it in part of my presentation today as a way to show you how we've solved some of the problems and how we've chosen to solve some of the problems. But first we're going to look at what are the main problems in getting started with mobile learning development and how you can solve them kind of generically on your own if you want, and then show you and explain how we chose to solve some of those problems, because I think it's illustrative. As we tried to decide how are we going to create a product that's going to help people create mobile learning quickly and effectively, we had to decide on certain approaches to these problems. So you may not choose to solve these problems in the same way that we did, but I think the most important thing is to learn what are those problems that need to be solved and what are some of the different options for solving them. And that's really what this particular webinar is about. It's how do you get started. When we first started looking at mobile learning development, it was kind of a black box to us. How do we get courses onto the devices? What technologies should we use? And how does it communicate with the LMS and things like that? And so we're going to review all of that and hopefully share some potential solutions with you, some of which cost nothing at all, and you can do completely on your own from scratch, and others that may incur cost but maybe provide some additional value there as well. So before I get started, I want to ask you a few questions about yourself. So I've got a couple of poll questions, and I'm going to start with a simple one, which is, have you created mobile learning already? So you should be able to see the poll. So go ahead and just click on the answer there, and after most of you have answered, I'll go ahead and share these polls with you. Having several hundred people in the webinar, it's great to have poll questions because we can get kind of instant research that we can all create and share together. So it's one of my favorite things about webinars is the ability to ask questions of the audience. So we've got about 80% of you that have voted here. So I'll wait until it gets up to 85 plus, and then we'll go ahead and share that. All right, so we're just over 85%. So I'm going to close this poll and share that with you. So you can see that roughly 80% of you have not created any mobile learning, and 20% of you have created something in that area. So it's still a technology or an approach, a solution that's yet to be widely adopted. There are many potential ways to try to solve this problem, and it's kind of like the Wild West out there in terms of potential solutions. So I'm hoping to help give you some guidance with some of the questions you need to be asking yourself. I'm going to share another poll question here, because this is extremely important when it comes to considering what kinds of solutions you're going to approach or decide on for creating your mobile content and mobile learning content. So the question being, are you a web developer or some kind of programmer? And I'll explain why some of these questions are relevant here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share that with you. So I had about 90% vote on that one. So a fair number of you, 40% or so, consider yourselves to be some kind of web developer, web programmer, And that can be very helpful when it comes to creating mobile learning content. But the majority of you would not consider yourselves to be programmers. And so this is one of the main reasons we decided to make some tools, is because we felt like we need to provide tools to people that don't want to become programmers and still want to rapidly be able to produce mobile learning content. And so you really have some options. If you're not a programmer, some of the things I'm going to share today, at least at the beginning, you may say, well, you're going to have to decide whether you want to learn the technology to do that. Other parts of the solution, the approach that we've taken, you may be able to, I shouldn't say you may be able to, anybody can really use those solutions in just a matter of a couple of hours. And so it's one of the things that you have to consider is how much time do you want to invest in developing your own skills to be able to create mobile content. So I'm going to hide that here. And I think that's all for the poll questions at the moment. I'm going to come back to some others here. So let's jump to the next slide. Let me make sure I hid that poll. Okay, yep. So this slide, I have a couple of slides on the growth of the mobile learning market. So this is the growth rate for the healthcare mobile learning market in the United States alone, and it's growing at 24% per year. So the only reason I'm sharing these stats is just to help you understand that this is not a fly-by-night trend that's going to go away or a fad, but it is really something that is gaining a lot of momentum. So that particular market, which is the healthcare learning market, is growing at 24% per year just in the United States. So the demand for it is growing quite rapidly. And if we look at the mobile learning market opportunity as a whole, that it also shows quite a steep adoption curve that's going on right now. So overall it's growing at 18.3%. So if you're wondering when the right time is that you should start thinking about and developing mobile learning, I wouldn't put it off any longer. There are always, of course, early adopters and then sort of mainstream adopters and then late adopters. And so there's advantages to being in any of those categories and disadvantages. But if you're wondering if this year or next year is the best time to take the plunge, I would say the sooner the better if you want a strategic advantage, because the adoption rate is growing very quickly, and so these are just some graphs that help illustrate that. These come from a research report by a firm called Ambient Insight, and you can get a lot of information for free from their executive summary that you can download from their website. And there's a lot more information in that executive summary, but this is a great source for learning more about how the mobile learning market is growing. So let's take a look at the first three big problems when it comes to mobile learning development. And then we'll talk about potential solutions. So problem number one is, how do I develop learning content that works on all of the different devices that are out there? So the problem is we have device operating system proliferation. When it came to compare to e-learning development a decade ago, we really only needed to worry about PCs and sometimes Macs, and then occasionally Linux. But today, in the mobile learning area, we have the need to consider lots of different operating systems and platforms, more than we had to in sort of the PC world. The other thing that's quite different about it is that in the PC world, one technology solved the cross-platform solution or problem, and that was Adobe Flash, then called Macromedia Flash. And that was a great benefit to all of us in e-learning development, because we didn't have to worry about whether our course was going to work the same way on a Internet Explorer browser or Firefox browser or Safari browser on a Mac. And so it really solved the cross-browser platform problem. The challenge is that on mobile devices, Flash doesn't work on all mobile devices, and specifically it's been shunned by the Apple devices, the iOS, iPad, and iPhone, which are, of course, some of the leading mobile devices out there in the marketplace. And so Flash is no longer a great solution for cross-platform development. It can be still a solution for some limited development, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But if you're looking for cross-platform, being able to develop across many different devices and platforms, Flash is generally not going to be a great problem solver for you. With that, I have and I'll talk about what potential solutions we can look at to get cross-platform support. But I want to ask you another poll question here. And this is choose all that apply. So select all of the different devices that you think that you'll need to support in your organization. Okay, we've got about 75% of you have registered your responses. We're up to close to 90% now. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. Again, I think these instant polls are very interesting and helpful so you can see what the landscape is like around you. And with a large audience like we have today, with several hundred people, we can have a pretty good sample. So these are pretty good, solid numbers, I would think. So you can see that there's a definite need for cross-platform support. So by the largest need there is for the Apple devices, which is not too surprising since they tend to be the most well adopted. But then you look at how many of you voted for Apple, Android, and BlackBerry, and then even other. And you can see that there's a need for some kind of cross-platform solution. And so that's one of the main problems that has to be solved. You don't want to rush off and spend all your efforts creating a solution that's just going to work on one platform unless you know that's the only platform you need to support. And that is possible. Some of the organizations I've been talking to over the last few months are purchasing iPads, for example, or they're purchasing Android tablets. Or BlackBerry tablets for their organizations and in mass. Other organizations are trying to adopt an approach where they will provide something that will work on most or all of the devices that their employees are already bringing to work. So something definitely important to think about. So that's the problem number one. Problem number two is how will learners access the mobile course content? Do I have to load it locally on the smartphone or tablet, or is there some easier way to do that, or some other way? What's preferable? So first of all, how do I create the content so that it works on all of the different devices? And then how do I make sure that it gets delivered onto those platforms? How does the learner access it? And then problem number three is, how do I track the learner results in the learning management system? Some people would argue that mobile learning should not be created in a way that needs tracking. We can just create some performance support materials, little tutorials that we just put out there. And they would argue that mobile devices are not ready to be used for consumption of large amounts of content. And when I hear that, I would beg to differ. And part of that comes from just my own experience with mobile devices. Part of it comes from watching other people and talking to lots of different people. But probably the biggest reason that I would differ from that opinion, and I would argue that large amounts of content that learners are ready to consume large amounts of content on their mobile devices, assuming it's designed well, is the adoption of ebooks. So if you look at how much content is being consumed through ebook readers, either on the Kindles, dedicated ebook readers, or multifunctional devices like the iPad, it's staggering. It's been an extremely fast adoption curve. People love using e-readers for the most part. I can't say that I prefer one myself over a book, but I do, for the convenience sake, use e-readers to read quite a bit. And so people are demonstrating that they're willing to consume hundreds and hundreds of pages of content. And if you think about the comparison between mobile learning, say interactive learning, and an ebook is the least interactive kind of content out there for the most part. They're actually building in more interactive kinds of content. But well-created text being consumed on mobile devices is being consumed by the hundreds of pages. So I would argue that you can and should consider creating entire courses that can be delivered and consumed on mobile devices. There's early information and evidence that learners will be more likely to finish and complete their learning courses if they can consume them and take them on their mobile devices. So how does that relate to the LMS? Well, I would argue that we should be thinking about how do we track all the learner data back to the LMS. Give people the option. Take your course on the desktop, take it on a mobile device. So I'm going to ask another poll question here. Just like to learn more about you. And I think it's fun to learn about everybody else that's for you in the audience here. So the question is, what kind of LMS do you primarily use? And SCORM is usually the most popular these days, but I've divided into SCORM, AICC. These are two data tracking standards, if you're not sure what we're talking about here. So it allows a course of some kind to communicate back to the data, such as a quiz score and so on, to the learning management system. And the reason it's important to understand this up front, to think about this up front, is if you've got a homegrown LMS, for example, I'm going to go ahead and close this and share the poll. If you've got a homegrown LMS, which it looks like 10% of you do, that's higher than I would have expected, you may need to build something very specific for your LMS or consider switching LMSs, which is difficult. But you may need to employ some really strong programming skills to be able to get your data to communicate back to your LMS. Or you may need to purchase an off-the-shelf product, and a mobile learning product that's flexible enough that you can modify and customize it and that sort of thing. If you're dealing with SCORM or AICC, then you're going to have better luck at finding off-the-shelf products that can help communicate to the LMS in one way or another. So to go back to the problems, the summary of the problems, and I think it's important to understand the right questions. So I spent a lot of time going over these problems because it's important to ask the right questions before you look for solutions. And so how do you create content that works on all these devices, if that's one of your needs? How do you get the content onto the device, or how does the learner access it with their device? Then how do we track the learner data? So let's take a look at the first problem, creating content that works. So I'm going to talk about some potential solutions, some of their advantages and disadvantages, and in each one of these areas. So solution number one is you can get the software development kit for any device, such as sorry about that. I was just told that my screen wasn't showing. I apologize for that. So it should be showing now. So I'm going to back up just a little bit to summarize the different problems briefly. So just so we have this slide in here. So creating content that works, meaning across the different platforms, getting the content onto the device, how does the learner access that content, and then how do we track the learner data in the learning management system. So let's focus on the first problem and some of the potential solutions. So solution number one is let's build a native app with the software development kit that comes from the device maker, so, or the operating system maker. So for example, you want to build for the iPad. You can download for very little or sometimes free the software development kit from Apple to build native apps. Now the advantage to this solution is you get a completely custom solution for your learning experience. And this can be extremely powerful. You look at some of the apps that people have built for the Apple devices, for example, or for Android, any of the devices, and they're very compelling. You've got flight simulators, full-scale games, and interactive social apps, and geolocation, and all kinds of things. So you can build something very, very custom. The downside to this is if you were to build a course using the native app, first of all, you'd have to learn the programming language for that particular platform that you're building for. So if it's an iPad, you have to learn Objective-C. And for Android, you have to learn Java. For BlackBerry, you can use Flash. Now, you can also use Flash on the Apple side. So if you want to build a course in Flash, Adobe has some tools that lets you publish to a native app, even though they won't take the Flash player on the Apple side. So that's another area. You could use Flash to do that. The downside is, again, you've got to learn programming skills if you don't have them. And number two, you've got to build a separate app for every course, which sounds not like it's not very scalable. Or you've got to design some kind of platform that pulls the courses in and so on. And I'll talk about some potential solutions along those lines. But I would generally steer people away from trying this approach unless you've already got mobile development skills. And even then, I wouldn't say it's a very scalable solution. This is something akin to the way we used to build e-learning 10 to 15 years ago, where you could build something very custom, but you couldn't build very many of them. And so it wasn't a very scalable solution, which is why all of the rapid e-learning tools kind of came onto the market, because building custom courses from scratch was not very scalable. You could still do it. You can hire out to do it, but I wouldn't generally recommend it as a long-term solution. Solution number two would be using proprietary mobile learning platforms. So a proprietary mobile learning platform would be a solution created by a vendor that is not based on any kind of standards. They simply created something that works, and you pay to use that solution, and you're locked into that solution. The advantage to that is they often have specific feature sets that you want. So as an example, if you need to support really old devices, such as old Blackberries and things like that are not some of the newer devices, there are some vendors out in the marketplace that will provide you with tools to support them. Now what you can deliver isn't all that impressive, but at least you can deliver mobile content on those devices. And the challenge there is that with a lot of the proprietary platforms, you're usually paying a whole lot, and you're tied to that vendor because you're using a proprietary system. The advantages, again, are usually broad cross-platform support, and I would say that was the main advantage that I would see. Another disadvantage that you'll see sometimes is they'll require that you use their tracking system. So they're usually in the business of trying to promote some tracking system that doesn't go directly to the LMS. And that's not necessarily a disadvantage always, but it is something that you have to think about whether you want to pay for that, whether that's important to you or not. The third solution, which is the one that we ended up choosing to go with after looking at all the different options, is using a standards-based cross-platform authoring solution. And I'll talk more about what that is and how you can do that on your own, or you can employ some vendor solution to do that. Solution number 4 would be, I put this in here as an alternate solution when it really might belong to the previous slides about cross-platform compatibility in terms of just another device. One of the questions that has come up from time to time is, if I create mobile content, do I have to create content for a completely different, do I have to create a completely different course for mobile devices? Or can I create content that creates it for both desktop and mobile at the same time? And so in one sense, you might think of cross-platform as all the different mobile devices, but if you broaden that, you might consider your desktop computers to also be part of the devices, right? You can look at all of them as simply ways for the learner to get that content and take the learning, complete the learning experience. So I'm going to ask another poll question here related to that, and that is, how important would it be to develop content for desktop and mobile at the same time? And the reason to think about this is simply because if you've got to develop it twice, you've got twice as many courses to maintain. And if you, on the other hand, you may want different functionality for your desktop versus mobile, right? So, there are kinds of different advantages and things to think about there. I'm going to go ahead and share this. We've got about 85% voted here. So 3% of you say that's unimportant. 7% of you are still not sure. You're really just kind of looking around wondering, what should I be thinking about here, which is good. And then the large majority of you consider that to be important or essential. I would say that course maintenance is one of the growing challenges in technology-based training. And one of the things that we need to consider when we look at building mobile learning courses is, are we going to create a maintenance nightmare? In other words, if we create 100 mobile learning courses and we also have to have 100 mobile desktop learning equivalents, how do we maintain that? And are we resourced enough to maintain that the right way? And so I would say, if this is important to you, look for solutions that will allow you to build for mobile and desktop at the same time if you can. And again, I'm going to talk about some ways that you can do that on your own and or in using some of the tools as well, because this is the solution that we ended up deciding to implement as well. So these would be the two that I would emphasize. Using standard-based cross-platform authoring. Standards are the way to go. If you can go with standards, you're usually going to be safe when you get down the road and you need to maintain or change or things like that, because standards are still going to be around. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on the standard I want to talk about, and you've probably heard a lot about HTML5 in the past. But this is extremely important for mobile development, mobile learning development, because HTML5 will work across many, if not all, of the different platforms. And when we talk about HTML5, HTML is the basis, is the language behind web pages, for those of you that are not real familiar with it. And HTML5 is simply the next version of that language that builds the web page. And what they've done is they've added some new tags, new kinds of functionality that make it much more capable for creating mobile learning interactivity and things like that. And when people say HTML5, they generally don't just mean HTML. They usually refer to in a broader sense, it's referring to HTML5, cascading style sheets, version 3, and JavaScript. And so I've kind of explained what each part of that overall technology is for. The HTML5 is for layout and video in general. And then you've got CSS3, which is really strong for animations, text formatting, all the CSS things that it does. And it can help with layout as well. These kinds of things kind of work together, all three of them. And JavaScript is really the interactivity. So when you see HTML5, you're really needing to know these separate technologies. Now you could build these from scratch just using a text editor, but there are some frameworks that I want to talk about that are free. These are all open source frameworks that you can use to build from scratch. And if I were starting and I wasn't looking at a specific vendor tool, I would start with one of these frameworks. And these are going to require that you have some programming skills, some more than others. But if you can apply some basic web programming skills, you can actually do some pretty neat things. So let's just take a look at each one briefly. Sencha is a cross-platform HTML5 web app framework. And all of these are designed for mobile devices. So they already have some built-in user interface elements. They have built-in functionality, such as the ability to swipe or pop things up. And you can see the different devices that they're sort of advertising it works on here. And our solution, Rapid Intake, is based on this particular HTML5 platform called Sencha. And it's the most well-adopted HTML5 mobile app framework out there. And so the advantage of basing a solution on a platform like this is you've got a wide community of support around that particular framework. So we're still based on the open standard of HTML5, but the framework makes it easier for rapid development, rapid tweaking and customizations, extensibility, and things like that, which has always been important in our solutions. So each one of these has similar kinds of capabilities. JQ Touch, I think, is the most approachable. If you're going to just start from scratch and build something, let's say you know some basic HTML, some basic JavaScript, JQ Touch feels a lot like using traditional HTML kinds of technology. Now Sencha is more designed around what's called an MVC programming framework in HTML5. So I'll leave it at that. JQ Touch, again, you can just download this for free and start building content and posting it on a web server somewhere. And what you're building with these are web pages, but they feel like native apps. And same thing with jQuery, and you can see jQuery down here. Their emphasis on their cross-platform compatibility. And jQuery isn't truly HTML5, fully HTML5 compatible, but they do implement HTML, JavaScript, CSS3, and so on to get that cross-platform support. So all of these work cross-platform. They're all based on HTML or HTML5, and they feel like native apps even though you're putting them on to a web server. So that is one of the things that I would recommend if I were going to start. Instead of just programming from scratch in HTML5, I'd start with one of these frameworks. Now, the thing that we've chosen to do is we decided, again, to go with HTML5 and also publish to Flash for the desktop at the same time. What I'm going to do now is talk about how to deal with the other kinds of issues, the LMS communication and being able to get access to the content on the mobile device. What we decided to do was we wanted to make it accessible from the desktop through Flash, through HTML5 on the mobile devices, and we wanted to make it accessible directly over the internet through the learning management system. So let's talk about some of the different options here. So when it comes to getting the content onto the device and tracking, the first one would be the native standalone app. It's offline. They just download it. If you build that from the SDK, the software development kit, they just download it from the App Store and put it onto their device. The challenge there is you don't really have any data tracking with the LMS. You could build that in by having them sign in through the app and having some kind of hooks on the other end. There would just be a lot of custom programming involved there. Solution number 2 is using, and these are offline solutions, a native mobile learning management app. And again, this is if you need access offline on the mobile device. Usually the solution here is the learner downloads a native app. They log in when they're online, they download the courses into the native app, and they take them offline and then synchronize back up somehow to the tracking system. And that tracking system may or may not communicate with the LMS. Again, it depends on the vendor. And we have a solution in this area as well, which I'll briefly talk about. But our main solution right now is to communicate directly with the learning management system. This does require an online connection, but you create a SCORM package and communicate directly. And so these are what I would consider the 3 different ways that you can get access to the content and communicate with the LMS. Again, to review, you're either going to get access to the content by downloading the course as a native app, or into some kind of learning management app, you're going to download the course into that, or you're going to access it directly to the LMS. So when you talk to different vendors and look at their different solutions, you'll see that they usually fall into one of these categories. I don't know too many that are currently offering a solution that connects directly to the learning management system, besides Rapid Intake, but there may be some others out there. So this slide emphasizes just that direct connectivity. And then we have the other slide that suggests a mobile learning management system where you've got something on the native app and it's going to synchronize or connect to and download courses from some kind of synchronization application. And this may or may not synchronize with the learning management system. So I'm going to jump to, give me just a moment, I'm going to jump to a different presentation here where I have a couple of other slides I want to share. Because I now want to share a little bit more about the decisions we made in building our product, and so you can compare and contrast decisions you may have to make, either building something on your own or choosing from a vendor. So the product that we released recently was called mLearning Studio, and again, I'm not going to do a full demonstration here, but as Chris mentioned, there is a webinar that is a full demonstration on this product on Friday. I think it's Friday. Anyway, coming up in the next few days. So you can find out more information about that on our website. One of the things that we decided, first of all, is how do we build content for all the different devices? And we settled again on HTML5, and that's what I would recommend for anybody. And that's because you can build once and put it on all the different devices. And this just gives a brief illustration of this is kind of how it looks on a smartphone, this is how it looks on a tablet. One thing I want to point out here is another important factor that you need to consider that I don't really put in my top 3 questions, but maybe should have been added as another very important question because it is an important problem to solve, and that is, how do you design for the mobile device? And so if you're going to deliver on smartphones and tablets, do you have to build your course twice, once for the smartphone, once for the tablet? Do you try to build something that works on both? How do you deal with those design issues? So this is one of the things that we solved in our approach, was we are pulling all the content from the same source, but we're displaying it in different formats. So you can see that the format for the tablet has kind of a desktop kind of feel to it. You've got your table of contents here, your controls, your content. But on the smartphone, that's not really practical. There's not enough screen real estate. And so what we decided to do is we made the tools pop up on tap. So when you tap them, the tools pop up. We also have Flash-based content for the desktop. So I'm going to show you a live example of this here, so you can kind of see some examples of actual learning content. So give me just a second to switch screens. And so this is mLearning Studio, and here are just a few samples that we've created. I'll show you how you can get access to these samples so you can try them on your own mobile devices. Because I think it's helpful, regardless of what approach that you end up taking, I think it's helpful to look at samples that other people have made to give you ideas about the things to consider and how to approach different kinds of interactivity and so on. So I'm going to look at just the dangers of distracted driving. And this one is just a mobile course only. It doesn't have a Flash component because it's designed just for mobile devices. And we have a special preview, so you can actually see the preview in certain browsers. You can see the mobile preview right inside the desktop browser. So you can see we have kind of a tablet view here. And up here you can switch between 10-inch tablet, 7-inch tablet, phone, and then you can rotate the orientation as well. So a couple things you'll notice is, again, we have our table of contents here on the left. We have toolbars. You have to think about navigation. How do people navigate through the course? Is it going to work in landscape or portrait, right? So if we rotate this, how does this look? And you can see that it's slightly different in the rotation view, because we have the table of contents that pops down and so on. You can swipe from screen to screen and video and so on. If we look at the phone view, you'll notice we get the same kind of content, and this is just a little sample that a beta tester built for us. But you get the same kind of content, but you can see that is designed for the smartphone, meaning the pictures are smaller. You can zoom in and kind of explore the images. And that's an important thing you have to think about, is how are people going to zoom in on detail that they need to see. And the controls show up on tap and then they hide on tap. And this allows you to navigate without taking up screen real estate. The table of contents, right, shows up in a different way. Let me show you another example. This one is a Flash and mobile course. So we have our Flash content showing up, and you can see the desktop option here. And we have the table of contents and all of that. Here we have the Flash video playing on this page. And I won't go through the whole video, but you can kind of see that. If we look at the tablet view, we'll rotate that around. You can see it's very similar because we have more screen real estate. This is HTML5. Now we get our video. All right, same video. This can go full screen on the device. And then if we look at the phone, right, the same kind of thing. We have the same content, and it's all coming from the same source, but we have it designed differently. And this is my main point here, is you've got to think about how you're going to design for the different devices and how to best approach that. So again, the same video playing here. So lastly, how do you preview and work with the content on these different devices? Again, you can preview right inside this browser window, and that's one of the benefits of HTML5 is you can preview some of that content right inside a browser that supports HTML5, or of course you can preview on the device. And so if you're building using tools like ours or from scratch, I would say make sure you test on the device itself. This can be a challenge because there's so many devices out there. We've had to purchase so many devices. A year and a half ago, we didn't have a single tablet, and now we have, we're awash with tablets. And that's because testing is extremely important. So do as much testing as you possibly can. Now, HTML5 giving you that standard does give you some comfort level knowing that it is supposed to work on all the different devices. But if you're building from scratch, you're going to have to do a fair amount of testing just to make sure. And that may be an advantage also of maybe going with a vendor's tools if it's been tested out on certain platforms. So when it comes to getting content, getting the or cross-platform content, we talked about that, getting access to the content, the solution we chose for this particular product is the learner needs an online connection. And they connect to it through their mobile device. They connect to the learning management system, log in as normal, and launch the course. And if it's one of these joint packages, what we do is we have it bookmark across the devices. So if they log in through a desktop browser and then pick it up on their mobile device and then come back to the desktop, it's going to work across those devices. Now, that solution does require an online connection. So if you need an offline connection, you may need to look at something in addition. So you could, the key is that you create, what I would recommend is creating, again, a standards-based package for communicating with the learning management system. So the way we handle that, decided to handle that, and we'll go into the same sample, is under the deploy the course. This is where you choose the learning management system, and then you choose SCORM or AICC and so on. So you need to learn some of those standards if you're not familiar with them. If you're going to build it from scratch, say you're going to start with Sencha or JQ Touch or something like that. Now, the other thing that you could do, and let me pull up the right slide here, is you can deliver, again, like I was mentioning, with an offline access solution. And I'll briefly talk about, this is a product that's in development right now here at Rapid Intake, and I'll briefly talk about how we're approaching this. And basically, the way this works is there's a native app that's downloaded from either an enterprise app server or the App Store or something like that. This is branded for the customer. The learner logs in, and it synchronizes with the learning management system. Well, it synchronizes first with the synchronization server, which then in turn synchronizes to the learning management system. And it gets the data that says how many courses they have. And then they can download the courses onto the actual device and launch the course. And of course the bookmarking works and so on. And all this synchronizes back to the learning management system. So I wanted to share that because that's kind of an approach I've seen several vendors take for offline access. So that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself is online or offline, or do I need both? Can it work with both? I want to share one final thing before I move into any questions. And that is, I'm going to jump back to HTML5 as the slide here. Because one other way that you can kind of combine some of these technologies together is using HTML5 and combining it with an application builder that will make a native app for you. So if we go back to the first solution that says, hey, I want to create a completely custom native app. Well, how do I do that? Or how do I build a course? What if I want to use HTML5, but I want to build a native app from that? So I want to share one other technology that's free out there for you. And I'm just going to pull this one up on the website because I don't have a slide. And this technology is called PhoneGap. And PhoneGap allows you to create a native app from HTML5. And so if we look at this, right, HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, then plug it into PhoneGap, and you can deploy to multiple platforms. It'll make a native Apple app or a native Android app. So for example, you could take the HTML5 that comes out of mLearning Studio, or you could take the HTML5 that comes out of Sencha or JQ Touch or whatever, and plug it into the PhoneGap and create a native app. Now again, you still have this problem of, do I want to create a native app for every course I make? But I still think it's a pretty neat technology that's important to know about and you may want to consider. So I want to leave with just a slide that shows some of the samples that you can look at. So give me a moment to get to that slide. So these are samples, again, built with our tools, but built in HTML5, so they should work cross-platform. So it's kind of fun to try them on Apple devices or Android devices. And these were all created using mLearning Studio. And again, if you want to try a free trial of mLearning Studio, you can go do that on our website. There's no cost or anything involved. You can build something and even keep it. So it's kind of fun to try this out. And you might compare that with trying to build something in JQ Touch. We have 5 different samples on our website, rapidintake.com/mobile1, and this one's a flash and mobile. We have mobile 2, and this is a mobile only. We have mobile 3, flash and mobile, and a mobile 4, this one's flash and mobile, meaning for desktop and mobile. And then the last one, which I showed you, mobile only, which is the one created by our beta tester there. So just remember mobile 1, mobile 2, mobile 3, mobile 4, mobile 5 at the end of rapidintake.com.